Thank you very much, Juris. Thank you, well, it's really, I promise not to use any word in French. I promise, except bonjour et voilà. The two key words of the day, bonjour et voilà, and that's it. So thank you, Dagnia, thank you, Juris, thank you all the team for asking me to speak today. And the question is, I need to tell you something. Before, when we were preparing this conference, Juris and Dagnia asked me to elaborate on how influencers are shaping a new world. And I asked them the question, are we really sure that influencers are shaping a new world? And I had a discussion with Juris and say, oh, probably I don't want to assume before my presentation that they are shaping a new world. And Juris say, yes, we have to assume that they are shaping a new world. So the discussion we have, and I would like to start my point here, is, and this discussion we had together has inspired me to ask myself the question, are they really shaping a new world? And if they are shaping a new world, how are they doing this? Because everybody is talking about influencers. It's a kind of a buzzword, and nobody knows exactly what's behind. I'm an influencer, you're an influencer, but frankly, what are we doing? Who do we influence? And what do we manage to change in our world? So I would like to go in the next minutes before lunch and to try to ask this question, are influencers shaping a new world? And if yes, how are they doing it? So let me tell you about, since we're talking about new world, let me tell you about the world before this new world. And I would like this grandfather, just I have the feeling to be like this person, and to tell you the story about what was the previous world, the old world. And I think if we're talking about communication, if we're talking about media, if we're talking about influence, the old world was characterized by the following elements. First element, the world was paced. What does it mean? It means that communication communicators were choosing the time to communicate. It was a rhythm, a kind of rhythm. They were deciding, and I remember many years ago when I was starting to do my career in PR, we were telling ourselves, sitting around the table and say, okay, we're going to communicate next Tuesday. And before next Tuesday, we were saying nothing. So this was spaced. Then it was slow. What does it mean, slow? It means that the audience had the time to wait for the news before being aware. Remember, for those of you who were just active and living, well, let's say, active and living. Let's say that in PR and communication, or in like 10 years or 20 years ago, the late evening news at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning, you were sitting there in front of your TV, but what were you doing? Basically, you were learning what was going on in the same day. And for most of us, we were sitting in the chair and were, wow, this has happened today, that's fantastic, that's crazy. And now, when we are sitting in the same sofa, watching the late evening news, we know already everything that is presented. So, in the year before, news was playing the role of a discovery. Today, it's not playing this role anymore. It's not a discovery anymore. It's a confirmation, it is illustration, but it's not discovery anymore. The third element is the world was formal. What do I mean by formal? Communication was very well structured and very well worked ahead by communicators. We were working on languages, we were looking at press release and whatever. Everything was formal and everything was very well prepared. Exclusive is another point, is another characteristic of the previous world. What does it mean, exclusive? You were deciding as a communicator, as a PR person, as a communication director, what you would want to communicate and what you would want to not communicate. You were deciding, no, we're not going to talk about this because we want to keep it private, or we want to keep it discreet, right? So it was very exclusive, and people who were communicating were leading, holding what was public, right? And finally, the world was informational. What does it mean? It doesn't mean that we were relying on information. And in fact, information was a starting point, just like you're watching the evening news. And from what you get on the evening news, which is an information, you start a conversation, right? Obviously, this is not what is happening today. And what is the new world? The new world is just the opposite of all this. The world is not paced anymore. It's continuous flow of information, absolutely continuous. It never stops, never, ever. Whatever the planet, whatever the place on the planet, never stops. It's fast. It's happened every moment. When there's something out, you know it before the next 10 minutes. It's spontaneous. It's shared, immediately shared globally with people together, and it's emotional. What does it mean emotional? Is that we don't wait for information, we don't share information online, we share emotions. And that is making a big difference, you know, a big difference. If I'm sharing an information with you, if I'm telling you something that is the nature of an information, you will get this, you will be educated, and that's it. If I share an emotion, it will eventually move you, and it will eventually provoke a reaction for you. So information sharing is totally different from emotional sharing. So what does it mean, this new world? It means that before thinking of the change in the world, like being presented several minutes ago by this fantastic organization in Russia, do they manage to change Russia? Not yet. But they're doing hard, they're working hard on it. But what is changing now, what has changed, is the world. So before thinking about, do influencers change the world? What you have to think first is influencers are changing the communications landscape. They are not changing the world. First, they are changing the communication landscape. And this is the big discovery. This is a fantastic discovery for you professionals. What does it mean? 10 years ago, when the social media appeared, individuals were more prepared and ready to go for social interaction, for social sharing, for social media. And in fact, this is what is happening. I remember 10 years ago when we were at the beginning of those social media and the social networks, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it, you know, very few companies were on it. There were only individuals on it. You know, if you remember 10 years ago, for those of you who were active at this time on social networks, there was absolutely no corporations. There was only individuals. And then we took the place like pioneers because we took this place and we found it was a good place to interact and to socialize. And what is happening is that before changing the world, we have changed the way we connect, we have changed the way we interact, we have changed the way we learn, we have changed the way we react to emotions. We have not changed the world, we have changed the way we socialize together. And most of the influencers that you call today influencers are nothing more than opportunists. I remember when I created my own blog. I created my blog back in 2004. I was not an influencer, and you know what? I was influencing nobody, just 10 people, or even not. Well, my mother, my brother, my father, a bunch of people in my company. And in fact, I was not an influencer. And you know what? Like, let's say 1 month after the opening of my blog, there was a journalist from a daily news in Paris that called me and said, okay, I'm doing a cover story of the new influencers. I was having like 150 readers every day who was I influencing? No one. But it was the kind of it was trendy, you know, to be a blogger and to be so-called an influencer. But what was I? I was just an opportunist. Not an opportunist to be famous, someone who wanted to take an opportunity of expressing myself on a very cool platform. I was not an influencer. And I know a lot of people that are blogging, a lot of people that are active on Instagram, Pinterest, you name it, that are not, that have never came on those platforms saying, I want to be an influencer. Today, maybe, but you know, many years ago, it was not the case. So, in fact, who do they influence, those influencers? That's what yesterday I read an article, it was fantastic. If I had read it before yesterday, I would have put in my presentation. It was an article of a guy, an interview of a guy, a top guy in the marketing and advertising, who's saying, okay, I'm fed up with influencers who are spending way too much money on those idiots that are just claiming to have big numbers of followers, but who cares, you know? You know, who cares? Are they really influencing anybody? So the question is that, are influencers influent? Which is the most important question. And what kind of impact do they have? And I've found something interesting to share with you, because they influence people. They are really influencers, that's for sure. But who they influence? They influence not the society directly. They are not in a situation, influencers, to make a change in the society, you know? I'm a great fan of activists. I'm a great fan of people like the ones who were doing the Wall Street, you know, walk. We are 99%. You've seen those posters, those activists with people sharing a panel, say, we are the 99%. That's true. We are the most numerous people. So we should be heard. But do the people from Occupy Wall Street have changed the world? The answer is no. Do the people that are standing every day in Place de la République in Paris for the movement called Nuit debout, I had promised not to call any French. But, you know, they didn't choose an English name, so that's not my fault. Nuit debout means night, standing up, yeah. Are they changing the world? No, they are not changing the world, but they try to. They dream about changing the world, but they are not. So influencers are not directly influencing the society. What they are doing, they are shaping a new world by influencing the old world. And they are influencing all the previous influencers. And this is what you have to learn. This is what you have to understand when talking about influencers. What are their responsibility? Their responsibility in the influence world is not to influence the society, but to influence the ones who had the power to influence before. That's the main learning that I would like to share with you. Who are they? They are journalists. I've got many examples I could quote where influencers, bloggers, or YouTubers, or you name it, have influenced journalists. Because journalists now are sourcing themselves on Twitter. 71% of journalists have a verified account on Twitter. It's one of the most represented population represented on Twitter, journalists, professional journalists. And they are using us, like regular influencers, to feel the world, to understand what's going on, and to understand the kind of stuff that will probably inspire them for their next news. So yes, we are influencing journalists. The second thing that we're influencing, I'm not sure about this one, but politicians. I'm not convinced anybody can influence this one, but this is another story. And it's, we are influencing politicians. They are scared, like you cannot imagine, about influencers. They're scared about people, regular people that are just claiming, creating a movement like Nuit debout. Twice. Because they don't know how to handle it. It's on social networks everywhere. So so politicians are just scared about that. Because the social networks everywhere, it's young generations that are protesting, so they are totally scared and paralyzed by this kind of movement. The other things that were influencing are business leaders, because they don't want to take decision before challenging the reputation of the businesses that are taking decision, that they are investing in. If they invest in a business that has a major reputation crisis, like it was said before by Rod, it can damage the bill, it can damage the revenue big time. If you're interested, go to see what is happening with Nestlé. You know Nestlé is it's not a French word, it's a Swiss word, in India. Nestlé has suffered of a big crisis in India due to, after a kind of a reputation crisis due to the Maggi noodle boxes. And I've read an article last month mentioning that Nestlé had probably lost $500 million in this reputational crisis in India. And when I'm talking about this as a reputational crisis, it is a reputational crisis. It comes from a story that there was some product in the noodles, but it was not true. But it was so badly managed by Nestlé, and at the same time so well managed by the activists, that it caused an immense problem. And when I'm talking about $500 million, you know, it has an impact on business leaders. So again, we're not changing the society, but we're changing the way business leaders are seeing our importance. And finally, it changes brands, because brands are caring about their reputation, they are caring about what we are saying online. You know, I remember on my blogger's story, since I've been a blogger in 2004, I've been many times contacted by brands who ask me very politely, Christophe, could you be kind enough to delete the article you've written about our brand, because it's kind of confusing for Google. Many times, you know, because in fact my post was likely coming to the first page of result of Google, and sometimes it was not positive, it was negative. I was not changing the world, I was not changing the future of the brand, but I was just changing the brand managers and changing the life of the brand manager, which I personally love, to make some trouble to those guys. But it's you know, it's the way it is happening. So influencers have an impact, for sure, on other influencers. And this is how they contribute to change the world. So my point, and back to the question that Juris has asked me to cover, I don't believe that yet influencers are changing the world, but we managed to change the world by influencing other influencers. It's a kind of a B2B2C model, where influencer other people that have eventually the possibility to influence really and to change the world. So this was my contribution to the question. And before giving you the opportunity to eat in the room behind me, I would like to remind you, since we are talking about influencers, I want to share with you a fantastic video. I love this campaign. I've loved this campaign. It is already many years ago, so it's quite several, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. It's been done in Sweden, and it summarizes perfectly what I would like to do with you. I don't know if the video is ready, but this is it.
मैं अपने छोटे पर एक साथ रहता हूँ। कभी-कभी मैं डरता हूँ कि मैं बीमार हो जाऊँगा, जैसे अब मैं हो गई थी। फिर मेरे भाई को कौन संभालेगा? लेकिन मुझे लगता है सब कुछ ठीक हो जाएगा। आज मैं सिर्फ सीधे के पास 1,77,000 लाइक्स फेसबुक पे, नामुमकिन नहीं है समर्थक 2 लाख हो जाए, फिर सब कुछ ठीक हो जाएगा।
That's a brilliant campaign. I like this campaign a lot, and it reminds all of us that sometimes, not always, but what we are feeling and living on social networks can be an illusion. And including the illusion that we change the world, including the illusion that we have a real impact on our future, on the future of our society. Because obviously the challenge is not to like anybody's posts, is not to say I'm very hungry against this president or another one or another brand. Our purpose is to have an impact and to change the world we're living. And there's something will never change. It's when it's time to get to lunch. So bon appétit.